I built a new LEGO castle creation called the Black Raven Inn. In this video, let me take you along the journey as I build it, and I'll show you the process behind how this was made, as well as some of the inspiration and the interesting building techniques that are packed into this. So let's go. The early process for building this medieval inn began by looking at some images of medieval houses and taverns. I just went to Google and Googled cool images of these things. I found this image, and the art style was a bit of fun, and I really loved the composition of this middle house. I wanted to build something with the same rough layout. So I began by laying down a few plates and building out some brickwork. My intention was to map out the rough floor plan, but I also really wanted to try out a brand new brick technique. So this one uses clips and plates to make these individual chunky bricks, and they attach onto these bars. So as the building progressed, I was liking the look of this light bluish grey brick technique, but I was immediately hating the size of this build. As I got to the main building, I just felt so limited by the lack of space that I'd set up for myself. I just didn't have room to play with interesting techniques on the walls of this tavern. I started off wanting this mock to just be a small little vignette, nothing too large. But this small scale, it just wasn't fun. So I decided to just start again, but with a bigger footprint. But I did actually quite like this cool roof design that I came up with here. I might have to revisit that on a future mock one day. So I changed up the color scheme and I got myself a larger footprint. So I had the base worked out, but with this new design, I drifted away from some of the older images that inspired me. So I found some new images to get my creative juices flowing. I found this fantastic image and I wanted to capture the same worn and weathered aesthetic, as well as the rough layout of this building. That was my plan. So I kept going with all of this brickwork and I made sure to make the bricks overlap as they went higher and higher, because that's how they look on real buildings. Essentially how this was done is I built up these 4 stud high pillars that were attached on their side, and then I put clips all across it, and then I placed these larger flex tube elements on these clips, and then I just put the individual bricks clipped onto that flex tube. It was a bit more of a parts hungry design, but the end result looks fantastic. As the brickwork continued, it was time to build up this little patio area. I added some food and furniture to make things look pretty and feel a bit more like lived in. And everything was just locked down onto these jumper plates or different studs in dark brown. Now here's a few images that show you how I built this furniture. The stool uses these claw pieces in brown, and these attach onto the bottom of a boat stud. And then in the middle of this boat stud, I attached one of these 1x round plates with a bar on the side. And the bar that's sticking out, that clips onto this substructure here, which is another boat stud with some dots, quarter tiles, and a 1x1 plate clip piece to attach it together. I then placed some of these trans clear plates underneath it, so this way it actually locks onto some studs and it's not going to move around. Because as cool as the bottom of that chair looks, there's no way of actually attaching it unless you do something like this. The table is just plates and tiles, but the edges use these new plant pieces in brown to give it a fancier look, and they attach onto these 1x2 rounded plate pieces on the edges. It's always a pleasure to add little details like this. So with the patio done and the brickwork basically finished, I added some brown tiles to cap off this brick area. Some areas required a little bit more improvisation since the LEGO maths didn't fully work at times, but it got the job done. Then from here I covered up this hollow inside and started to add in some of these white plates. Now before starting work on those white walls for the tavern, I mapped out the rough locations that I wanted the windows to be placed on each of the walls. They weren't actually attached yet, I was just kind of placing them here to see what the rough distribution of the windows would look like and if I thought it aesthetically looked good. Once I was happy with it, I actually started to work on the walls and actually place the windows in place. Now I decided to use a unique technique for these walls. I wanted them to be white, but if you know LEGO, white is a color that often yellows and fades, somewhat easily unfortunately. So I thought, why not use that to my advantage? I'll mix tan and white plates, along with some of the yellowed white plates that I have in my collection. And that way it'll look like the walls are actually like weathered, aged, or damaged. And the beautiful thing as well, I already had a bunch of those lying around in my collection, but if I needed to buy more, it's pretty easy to buy them on Bricklink because weathered ones, they're pretty cheap. Everyone wants to buy fancy new ones, but the weathered ones, they got good uses too, you can't discredit those. So yeah, I thought this looked perfect for a medieval building. As nice as it looked, it did require me to use a lot of different plates of different sizes and shapes. And as a result, the inside looked a tad ugly. It was at this moment that I realized the mock was not going to be able to have an interior because there wasn't really space for an interior. Then I added some clips and bars above the door, I built this nice little roof structure, and then I slotted it onto these bars and clips, and now the patio has a nice sloped roof above it. Yay! It was also at this point that I began adding in some olive green vines onto the walls. I attached these with the use of some headlight bricks or some other different types of snot bricks, and I simply just placed them inside there, and it looks like there's vines crawling up the walls. Because to a degree there literally is. So now it was time to place this house onto a base plate. Done. I wanted to start work on the landscape around it at this point, but I decided to leave it for later. I was getting really sucked into building this building and I just wanted to keep going. So to make building the landscape a little bit easier, I added some of these black bricks on the bottom of the building so it was almost up on stilts. And then this gave me plenty of space to build landscape that could ebb and flow and get a little bit higher or lower. Now, the original image that inspired this mock had the top floor kind of protruding out a little bit with some of these wooden support beams underneath it. So I decided to do the same thing, and I used some of these dark brown 1x2 slopes with some dark brown cheese slopes on the edges for those support beams. And these are just simply attached with some of these snot bricks. Oh yeah, and I added this nice little side area here for some horses to stay in. And I also added some vines on the top of the roof here. They're just simply attached onto these jumper plates. As I pressed on, I encountered a slight problem. I capped off the first floor with this nice wooden area here, so that it could nicely transition into the second floor. But the way I built this, if I were to build off the studs that were in the center here, they didn't actually sit flush on top of this dark brown area. And it needed to sit flush so that it could look consistent with the bottom floors. And also, I wasn't just gonna have the second floor slightly hovering above the first floor. So how was I gonna fix this? Well, I improvised. I placed these Technic beams here, and then I created a platform that just slid down on top of these beams. The platform has these Technic plates with holes in them so that the beams can nicely slide through them. And now the second floor can sit flush with this nice dark brown area. Well, at the moment it's slightly lifting up on the edges, but when you put a bit of weight on it, it sits flush. And weight was certainly going to come later when I started building that second floor. And so that's what I did. I added another floor, I repeated a lot of the same techniques that I'd used before. Oh, but I did add these tan panels onto the windows here. This way, if you do peek through the windows, you can kind of sort of see something, but also see nothing, which is the intention. I don't want you peeking through and seeing the horrible, ugly rainbow interior that's inside. From here, I had to tackle the roof, and honestly, I was a little terrified to do this because angles are not an easy thing to do with Lego, and roofs, well, they're something I've struggled with in the past. Turns out the solution was surprisingly simple and I had nothing to worry about. Story of my life. I just had to build up this sloped white triangle area, and then I tested out some clips and bars and attached a big white plate onto them to see if the roof would actually sit flush with this triangular wall. It did, that's good. So from there I just started building the roof. Now I made sure to establish this big dark brown plate on the front so that you can't see any of the gaps between the white area and the roof itself. That just sort of neatly covers it up. Then all I had to do was add in some supports behind the black plates, add in some more of those clips on the very top bit of the triangle part of the roof so that it's locked in nice and sturdy, and I got myself a roof. I used a somewhat similar design for the other more sloped part of this roof on the opposite side. I had to use some of these grill slopes because they fit the angle of this part of the roof a lot better than the regular slopes did that I used before. And then I just placed the roof onto some of these angled plate pieces, and it worked great. So the house was basically done, and now I could start work on the landscape. At first, it was actually green. I had heaps of green plant pieces and wedge plates and all sorts of stuff, and I wanted to use them. But I thought, I don't know, these colors were just too bright, especially when you compared it to the more drab and desaturated colors that the building had going on. It was just kind of clashing too much. And also, green and olive green, not really a great combination for nature and plants. Just didn't like how that looked. So after about 2 hours of work on this landscape, might have even been more than that, I had to take it all apart and make room for the final product. Sand green looked way better here, and it fit that desaturated look and overall design very, very well. I added lots of trees in the background, so it made it feel like this was deep in a forest. I also kept this nice little notice board up the front. I put some of these printed tiles on here. These are some custom printed pieces. They come from a place called K-Town Bricks. It's a website that makes all sorts of great like custom printed minifigures and tiles and accessories. This is not an ad, I just think their stuff is fantastic. And it was the perfect finishing touch for this mock. Oh, and by the way, this lady on the patio here, she is actually using a torso and dress piece that is also from K-Town Bricks. That's not an official printed piece. Well, it's printed on official Lego, but it is not produced by Lego. You get what I mean. I also added in some patches of light aqua bricks. I thought it all blended surprisingly well with the sand green, and it looked a bit like faded or dried grass. I tried to place it in areas where there would have been a lot more foot traffic, and perhaps the grass had been a bit faded because of that. But I didn't put too much in because I thought the sand green looked really nice, and I didn't want to confuse things with multiple colors. But I'm happy with how the little patches look. But yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with how this build turned out. I always love building Lego Castle stuff, so anytime I can visit that world, it's always a pleasure. I certainly enjoyed building and recording this video. I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I did. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Happy building, and bye for now.